The dawn broke harsh over the western plains, painting the dried grass in shades of gold and rust. Cicadas droned their endless song, while smoke from distant homesteads rose thin against the cloudless sky. At the small railroad depot of Clearwater Junction, two women stood apart from the morning crowd, their dresses dark against the weathered platform boards. "He'll never know it wasn't me, not unless you tell." Martha Dillard's voice cut through the morning air like a blade through silk. She stood straight-backed, her traveling case at her feet, watching Evangeline Crow with eyes as cold as January frost. Evangeline's fingers trembled as she clutched the worn leather satchel containing everything she owned in this world. The weight of what she was about to do pressed upon her chest like stones. "Martha, You what?" Martha's lip curled. "You'll go back to scrubbing floors in Boston, taking in washing until your hands crack and bleed. Your mother's gone. Evangeline, you've got nothing there, nothing anywhere, except this chance I'm giving you." The truth of it stung worse than any slap. 3 months since consumption had taken her mother, leaving Evangeline with debts that swallowed their meager savings whole. The landlord had given her 2 weeks before eviction, 2 weeks before she'd be on the streets with winter coming fast. Silas McGrath. Martha spoke the name like tasting something bitter. "A cattleman out in Cedar Ridge, 43 years old, never married. Sent for a bride through the agency 6 months back. Sent money for passage, too." She pulled a small photograph from her reticule, pressing it into Evangeline's palm. "That's him? Study it well." Evangeline looked down at the tintype image. A man stared back at her, broad-shouldered and stern-faced, with deep-set eyes that seemed to see right through the camera lens. His jaw was strong beneath a neatly trimmed beard, and though he didn't smile, there was something in his expression that spoke of steadiness rather than cruelty. "Why?" Evangeline whispered. "Why won't you go yourself?" Martha's laugh was sharp as breaking glass. "Because I've found something better. A merchant in Chicago who doesn't live in some godforsaken wilderness, fighting drought and Indians and Lord knows what else." She adjusted her gloves with precise movements. "I wrote Silas 2 weeks ago that Martha Dillard would be arriving on today's train. He's expecting Martha Dillard. You'll be Martha Dillard." The train whistle shrieked across the platform, black smoke billowing from the engine as it approached like some iron beast of destiny. People began gathering their belongings, mothers clutching children, men hefting trunks. "I don't know how to be someone else," Evangeline said, her voice barely audible above the growing noise. "You'll learn." Martha gripped her arm, fingers digging deep. "Listen close. I told him I'm 24, from Philadelphia. Father was a shopkeeper, died when I was young. Mother raised me proper needlework, cooking, all the things a frontier wife needs. I can read and write, quote scripture when needed. That's all he knows. That's all he needs to know." The train pulled to a stop with a great hissing of steam and squealing of brakes. Passengers began boarding, and Martha pushed the ticket into Evangeline's hand. "Car 3, seat 12. He'll be waiting at Cedar Ridge Station. Tall man, likely wearing his best clothes for the occasion." "Martha, please." "It's done." Martha's face softened for just a moment, perhaps remembering the friendship they'd shared as girls, before circumstances had hardened them both. "You need this, Evangeline, and he needs a wife. What does it matter what name she carries?" Before Evangeline could respond, Martha turned and walked away, disappearing into the crowd without a backward glance. The conductor called for final boarding. Evangeline stood frozen, watching the space where Martha had been, the weight of another woman's name settling on her shoulders like a yoke. She climbed aboard with leaden feet, finding her seat by the window. The worn velvet was rough beneath her fingers as she settled in, placing her satchel on her lap. Around her, other passengers chatted and arranged themselves, but Evangeline heard none of it. Her reflection in the window glass showed a pale young woman with dark hair pinned severely back, green eyes wide with fear. 22 years old, though she could pass for 24. The dress Martha had given her was finer than anything she'd owned. Deep blue wool that would be suitable for a cattleman's wife. As the train lurched forward, Evangeline closed her eyes and thought of her mother. What would Margaret Crow think of her daughter now, taking another woman's name, living another woman's life? But her mother had been practical above all else. "Sometimes, my dear," she'd said near the end, "we must choose between death with honor and life with compromise. Choose life, Evangeline, always choose life." The miles rolled by, each turn of the wheels carrying her further from everything she'd known. Boston's crowded streets and soot-stained buildings gave way to farmland, then to prairie, then to something wilder still. The land opened up like a great brown sea, dotted with scrub brush and crossed by barbed wire fences that glinted in the afternoon sun. Tiny towns appeared and vanished, mere clusters of buildings huddled against the vastness. Evangeline studied the photograph until she'd memorized every line of Silas McGrath's face. She practiced Martha's history in her mind, turning the lies over until they felt smooth as river stones. Philadelphia, shopkeeper's daughter, 24 years old. She could be those things. She had to be those things. Other passengers came and went at various stops. A drummer tried to engage her in conversation, but she kept her responses short, afraid of revealing too much. A woman with 2 small children sat across from her for a time, and Evangeline helped calm the baby when it fussed, earning a grateful smile. Such simple human kindness made her chest ache with the magnitude of her deception. Night fell, and still the train pushed westward. Evangeline dozed fitfully, dreaming of her mother's gentle hands, of Martha's cold eyes, of a stranger's photograph come to life. When she woke, the landscape had changed again. Red dust coated everything, and the vegetation grew sparse and twisted. Mountains rose in the distance, purple shadows against the morning sky. "Cedar Ridge, next stop," the conductor called. Evangeline's heart hammered against her ribs. She smoothed her skirts with trembling hands, checked her hair in the window's reflection. The few remaining passengers began gathering their things. Through the window, she could see the station approaching a simple wooden structure with a water tower beside it. A handful of buildings beyond that constituted the town. And on the platform, a lone figure waited. He was taller than she'd expected, broader too. The photograph hadn't captured the way he carried himself. Straight-backed but easy, like a man comfortable in his own skin and with the land he stood on. He wore a clean white shirt and dark vest, his best hat in his hands. As the train slowed, Evangeline could see him scanning the windows, looking for her, looking for Martha. The train stopped. Around her, passengers filed toward the exit, but Evangeline remained frozen in her seat. This was her last chance to turn back, to refuse this charade, but turn back to what? Empty rooms and empty pockets, the poorhouse, the streets. She stood on unsteady legs, gripped her satchel, and made her way to the door. The desert air hit her like a slap, dry and sharp, carrying the scent of sage and dust and something wild. She descended the steps carefully, her traveling dress suddenly feeling too fine, too false. "You'd be Miss Dillard." His voice was deeper than she'd imagined, roughened by years of wind and weather. Evangeline raised her eyes to meet his, and for a moment, her carefully practiced lies scattered like leaves. His eyes were gray as winter storms, steady and searching. This close, she could see the lines carved by sun and time around his eyes, the careful way he held himself, respectful but watchful. She swallowed hard, tasting dust and deception. One word would seal her fate, chain her to this lie forever. But the alternative was no life at all. "Yes," she whispered, then cleared her throat and spoke stronger. "Yes, I'm Martha Dillard." Something flickered in his expression, relief, perhaps, or simple satisfaction that she'd arrived as promised. He stepped forward, took her satchel with a gentleness that surprised her. "Silas McGrath, pleased to finally meet you. Miss Dillard, I've got the wagon waiting. It's a fair piece to the ranch. She nodded, not trusting herself to speak further. As he led her toward a weathered buckboard wagon, Evangeline caught a glimpse of herself in the station window, a young woman in a borrowed name and a borrowed dress, stepping into a borrowed life. The first step of her new existence had been taken. There was no turning back now. The wagon wheels creaked in steady rhythm as they left Cedar Ridge behind, raising small clouds of red dust that hung in the still air. Evangeline gripped the wooden seat, her knuckles white beneath her gloves. Beside her, Silas McGrath handled the reins with easy competence, his eyes fixed on the rutted track ahead. "It's a hard land," he said after they'd traveled in silence for near a mile. "Harder still on those who don't belong to it." The words sent a chill through her despite the afternoon heat. Did he suspect already? But when she glanced at him, his expression remained neutral, merely stating fact as he saw it. "I'm stronger than I look, Mr. McGrath," she managed, her voice steady despite the fear coiling in her stomach. A ghost of something approval perhaps crossed his features. "I reckon you'll need to be." The landscape rolled out before them in waves of brown and gold, broken by stands of twisted juniper and outcroppings of red rock. The road, such as it was, wound between low hills dotted with sparse grass and prickly pear cactus. In the distance, mountains rose blue and hazy, their peaks still touched with snow despite the warming season. Silas pointed to a circling hawk overhead. "Redtail. Means good hunting. The land provides, but you've got to know how to ask." He glanced at her sideways. "Your letters said you knew something of cooking." "Yes," Evangeline replied, grateful to Martha for sharing at least that much truth. "My mother taught me well." At least this wasn't a lie. Her own mother had been an excellent cook, making miracles from the little they had. "Good. Ranch hands eat hearty. 3 meals a day when they're working cattle. You'll have help. Miguel's wife, Rosa, comes twice a week for washing and heavy work. She'll teach you what you need to know about cooking for this climate." They passed a broken-down wagon half buried in sand, its wooden ribs bleached white as bones. Evangeline shivered despite the heat. How many dreams had died out here in this unforgiving land? "That's the old Swenson place," Silas said, following her gaze. "Came out from Minnesota 5 years back. The drought of an 81 broke them. Land doesn't forgive poor planning or wishful thinking." The house appeared as they crested a low rise, a simple wooden structure weathered to silver gray, with a tin roof that caught the late afternoon sun. A windmill creaked nearby, its blades turning lazily in the slight breeze. Behind the house stood a barn and several outbuildings, all showing the same weathered patina. Scraggly chickens pecked in the dirt yard, and a few cattle grazed in a fenced pasture beyond. It was nothing like the neat farms of New England. With their painted houses and tidy gardens, this was raw, elemental, carved from the wilderness by sheer will and stubbornness. Evangeline felt something twist in her chest, fear or anticipation. She couldn't tell which. Silas pulled the wagon up before the house and came around to help her down. His hands were steady on her waist, lifting her as if she weighed nothing. For a moment they stood close, and she caught his scent leather and soap and sun-baked earth. Then he stepped back, a faint color rising in his weathered cheeks. "Welcome to the Double M," he said simply. "It ain't much, but it's solid. Built it myself. First year I was here." He carried her satchel inside, and Evangeline followed, her heart hammering. The main room was larger than she'd expected, with rough plank floors and walls covered in whitewash. A stone fireplace dominated one wall, cold now in the warm weather. The furniture was simple but well made: a table and 4 chairs, a rocking chair by the fireplace, shelves holding dishes and supplies. A rifle hung on pegs above the mantel, and beside it, incongruously, a small watercolor of mountains that might have been anywhere. "Kitchen's through here," Silas said, leading her to a lean-to addition with a large stove, work table, and pump sink. "Spring water comes right to the house. That's rare in these parts." Bedroom's there. He nodded toward a door off the main room. I'll take the barn for now. Until we're properly married. The propriety of it surprised her. She'd heard tales of frontier men who cared nothing for convention, but here was Silas McGrath, rough as he was, offering her the respect due a lady. It made her deception weigh even heavier. That's very considerate. Mr. McGrath. Silas, he corrected. We're to be married, after all. Might as well start getting used to it. He showed her where things were kept: flour and meal in tins against mice, preserved goods in the pantry, salt pork in the barrel, the garden patch out back, struggling but alive with beans and squash, the root cellar carved into the hillside, the necessary house a discreet distance from the main building. As the sun lowered toward the mountains, painting everything in shades of gold and rose. Silas excused himself to tend the animals. Evangeline found herself alone in the house that was to be her home, surrounded by the belongings of a man she didn't know, pretending to be someone she wasn't. She unpacked her few things, hanging her dresses on pegs in the bedroom. The bed was narrow but sturdy, covered with a quilt that showed careful mending. On a small table sat a Bible and a photograph of a stern-faced couple who must be Silas's parents. No other personal items softened the Spartan space. In the kitchen, she found ingredients for a simple supper: beans soaking in a pot, a bit of bacon, cornmeal for bread. She set to work, grateful for the familiar tasks that didn't require lies. Her hands knew this work, even if everything else about her was false. When Silas returned, washing at the pump outside before entering, she had beans simmering with bacon, fresh cornbread cooling, and coffee hot on the stove. He stopped in the doorway, something flickering across his face: surprise, perhaps, or simple pleasure at the domestic scene. They ate in near silence, the only sounds the clink of forks on plates and the distant calling of coyotes. Evangeline kept her eyes on her food, afraid that too much conversation would reveal her deception. Silas seemed comfortable with the quiet, eating steadily and refilling his coffee cup twice. "It's good," he said finally, pushing back his empty plate. "The cornbread especially. Haven't had its like since my mother passed." "Thank you," Evangeline murmured, unexpectedly touched by the simple praise. After supper, Silas helped clear the table, another surprise, then settled in the rocking chair with the Bible. "I generally read a passage before bed," he said. "You're welcome to join me, or not, as you prefer." She took a chair near the lamp, pulling out the mending she'd noticed needed doing. His voice was deep and measured as he read from Psalms, the familiar words washing over her. Her mother had read the same passages in their small Boston rooms. For a moment, homesickness threatened to overwhelm her. When full dark fell, Silas closed the book and stood. "I'll bid you good night. Then, breakfast is at dawn. I'll knock before I come in." He paused at the door. "I know this is strange for you. For me too, truth be told, but I believe we can make a good life here. Miss Martha." The hesitation before her false name sent ice through her veins, but he merely nodded and left, the door closing softly behind him. Evangeline sat in the lamplight, listening to his footsteps fade toward the barn, outside. The night sounds were alien: no city noise, no neighbors, just wind and coyotes and the vast breathing of the empty land. She thought of Martha, probably in Chicago by now, laughing at her clever escape. She thought of Silas in the barn, respectfully keeping his distance from the woman he believed would be his wife. When she finally sought her bed, she lay awake long into the night, staring at the rough ceiling beams. Every sound made her start the house settling. Mice in the walls, the windmills creak. This was her life now, built on a foundation of lies. Tomorrow she would wake as Martha Dillard again, and the next day, and the next. But tonight, in the darkness of a stranger's house in a strange land, she let herself cry for Evangeline Crow, the girl she'd left behind on a train platform. who'd traded her very name for a chance at survival. The morning sun found them working side by side, mending the fence line that bordered the eastern pasture. Evangeline held the posts steady while Silas drove them deep with powerful swings of the hammer. Sweat beaded on her forehead despite the early hour, and her hands, even through Martha's borrowed gloves, were beginning to blister. "Here," Silas said, noticing her struggle with a particularly stubborn post. He moved behind her, his large hands covering hers on the wood. "Angle it just so. The ground's harder here. You need to find where it wants to give." His nearness made her breath catch. She could feel the warmth radiating from his body, smell the honest scent of work and leather. For a moment, their hands moved together, guiding the post into place, and she felt something shift between them, a recognition, perhaps, of shared purpose. "There," he said softly, stepping back. "You're getting the feel of it." Her heart hammered as she watched him return to his work. 3 weeks had passed since her arrival. 3 weeks of careful pretense and growing familiarity. Each day brought new challenges, learning to manage the temperamental stove, understanding the rhythms of ranch life, maintaining her facade while slowly discovering the man she was meant to marry. Silas was not what she'd expected. Quiet, yes, and sometimes distant, but there was a gentleness to him that surprised her. He never raised his voice, never complained when her biscuits burned or when she forgot to gather the eggs. He taught her patiently, praised her small victories, and kept his respectful distance even as she caught him watching her sometimes with an expression she couldn't read. "We'll need supplies come Saturday," he said as they loaded the tools back in the wagon. "Town trip. You'll want to make a list." The prospect of facing others while wearing her false identity sent anxiety spiraling through her. But she nodded, knowing it couldn't be avoided forever. Saturday dawned clear and hot. Evangeline dressed carefully in her second-best dress, pinning her hair up properly beneath her bonnet. Silas had shaved and wore a clean shirt, looking almost handsome in his Sunday best. He helped her into the wagon with the same careful courtesy he always showed, and they set off toward Cedar Ridge. The town seemed busier than on her arrival day. Wagons lined the main street, and people moved between the handful of shops and businesses. As Silas tied up the horses, Evangeline became aware of the stares and whispered conversations following their progress. "That's her," she heard a woman mutter. "The mail-order bride?" "She's too fine a rose for this dust," another responded. "Look at those soft hands. She won't last the winter." Heat flooded Evangeline's cheeks, but she kept her head high as Silas offered his arm. His jaw had tightened at the comments, but he said nothing, simply guiding her toward the general store. Inside, the proprietor, a thin man named Josiah Watts, greeted them with professional courtesy tinged with curiosity. "Mr. McGrath. And this must be the future Mrs. McGrath. Heard tell you'd brought in a bride from back east." "Miss Dillard," Silas said evenly. "We've come for supplies." As Evangeline moved through the store, gathering flour and coffee and other necessities, she felt the weight of scrutiny from the other women shopping. Their dresses were simple calico and homespun, their hands rough from work, their faces weathered by sun and wind. Beside them, she felt as false as fool's gold. At the fabric counter, she hesitated over a bolt of practical brown wool, suitable for a work dress. The price was dear, but her traveling clothes wouldn't last forever in this rough life. "The blue would suit you better," a voice said behind her. Evangeline turned to find a young woman about her own age, with kind brown eyes and Mexican features. "I'm Rosa Hernandez, Miguel's wife. My husband works for Mr. Silas." "Oh," Evangeline felt a rush of relief at the friendly face. "He mentioned you. I'm Martha Dillard." Rosa smiled. "I know who you are. The whole valley knows. Don't mind the talk. They gossip just as much. When I married Miguel, said a Mexican girl had no business on an American ranch." She fingered the blue fabric. "This is good cloth. It will wear well and the color won't fade too quick in the sun. I shouldn't, Evangeline said. It's not practical. A woman needs something pretty sometimes, Rosa said firmly. To remember she's more than just work and worry, mister. Silas won't grudge you. He's a good man, better than most know. As they talked, Evangeline felt some of her tension ease. Rosa's warmth was genuine, her advice practical. She suggested which merchants were fair and which to avoid, warned about the alkaline water that would ruin good soap, promised to come by the following week to help with the washing. Their conversation was interrupted by loud voices from the street. Through the store window, Evangeline saw Silas facing a well-dressed man with a marshal's star on his vest. The lawman stood too close, his posture aggressive. Loneliness makes fools of us all, McGrath, the marshal said, loud enough for passers-by to hear. But ordering a woman from a catalog, what kind of wife can that make? Silas stood still as stone, his hands loose at his sides. Evangeline knew that stillness now. It was how he looked before a storm, or when the cattle were restless. Dangerous quiet. A man's business is his own. Pike, Silas said, his voice level. Marshal Harlan Pike laughed, an ugly sound. Not when he brings strangers into our community. We've got standards here, got to protect our own from those who might not be what they seem. The threat in the words made Evangeline's blood run cold. Did he know had Martha been found out somehow? The lady's my intended, Silas said, each word precise as a hammer blow. That's all anyone needs to know. We'll see, Pike said, tipping his hat with mock courtesy. We'll just see about that. Silas turned and walked back to the store, his face carved from granite. Inside, he found Evangeline by the counter, Rosa hovering protectively nearby. We're finished here, he said shortly, while Mr. Watts tallied their purchases, including the blue fabric Evangeline hadn't asked for. Silas stood at the window, watching the street. The ride home was silent. Evangeline wanted to speak, to thank him for defending her, to apologize for bringing trouble, but the words tangled in her throat. It wasn't until they were back at the ranch, supplies unloaded, that Silas finally spoke. Pike's a snake, he said, not looking at her. Likes to push people, see if they'll break. You did well today. Held your head up. They don't want me here, Evangeline said softly. They don't know you. He turned then, his gray eyes intense. The land doesn't care what they think. It only asks if you'll stay. Will I? The question slipped out before she could stop it. Stay. I mean, through winter and drought and people like Pike. Silas studied her for a long moment. I'm starting to believe you might. That evening, as Evangeline served the supper she'd kept warm, she noticed Silas had brought something in from the wagon, a small parcel wrapped in brown paper. For you, he said gruffly, pushing it across the table. Inside was a length of ribbon, sky blue to match the fabric, and something else, a small silver thimble, etched with tiny flowers. It was my mother's. He said, thought you might have use for it, with your sewing. Evangeline's eyes burned with sudden tears. This simple gift, given without fanfare, meant more than he could know. She was a fraud, living a lie. And yet here was this man offering his mother's thimble as if she deserved it. Thank you, she whispered. I'll treasure it. That night, she sat by lamplight, cutting out the pattern for her new dress with Rosa's promised help in mind. The silver thimble caught the light as she worked, a small promise of belonging in this hard land. Outside, coyotes called to the rising moon, and somewhere in the barn, Silas McGrath kept his respectful distance from the woman he believed would be his wife. But for the first time since stepping off the train, Evangeline allowed herself to think it might be possible not just to survive here, but perhaps, someday, to truly belong. Sunday morning arrived with a cloudless sky and the distant ringing of church bells carrying across the valley. Evangeline stood before the small mirror in her room, adjusting the collar of her new blue dress. Rosa had helped her finish it just 2 days prior, and the fabric felt crisp and hopeful against her skin. "Ready," Silas called from outside. She emerged to find him waiting by the wagon. Dressed in his church clothes, a black coat that emphasized his broad shoulders, and a string tie that made him look almost formal. His eyes widened slightly when he saw her. "You look—" He paused, seeming to search for words. "That dress suits you." The ride to town felt different this time. Silas had shaved carefully, and she caught the scent of bay rum when the wind shifted. He'd even brushed his hat and cleaned the dust from his boots. They looked, she realized with a start, like a proper courting couple heading to Sunday service. The small church sat at the end of Main Street, its whitewashed walls stark against the red earth. Wagons and horses already crowded the yard, and families gathered in clusters, exchanging news and gossip before the service. As Silas helped her down from the wagon, Evangeline felt the weight of dozens of eyes upon them. "Chin up," he murmured, offering his arm. "We've as much right to be here as anyone." Inside, the church was plain but well kept, with rough-hewn pews and windows that let in streams of dusty light. Silas guided her to a pew near the middle, not so far forward as to seem presumptuous, not so far back as to appear ashamed. As they settled, Evangeline noticed Rosa and Miguel across the aisle. Rosa gave her an encouraging smile. The service began with familiar hymns, and Evangeline found comfort in the routine of it. Beside her, Silas sang in a low baritone, surprising her again. His voice was untrained but true, and he knew all the words without looking at the hymnal. Reverend Morse, a thin man with kind eyes, delivered a sermon on Ruth and Naomi about finding home in strange lands and the courage of women who ventured into the unknown. Evangeline felt the words pierce her heart. Was she Ruth, clinging to a new life? Or was she something worse, a deceiver in God's own house? After the service, the congregation filed out slowly, pausing to greet the minister. When their turn came, Reverend Morse clasped Silas's hand warmly. "Good to see you, Silas, and this must be Miss Dillard." His smile was genuine. "Welcome to Cedar Ridge. I hope you'll find a home among us." "Thank you, Reverend," Evangeline managed, her voice steady despite her inner turmoil. Outside, the social ritual continued. Some families nodded politely and moved on. Others stopped to introduce themselves: the Carlsons, who ran a small spread to the north, the widow Jensen, who kept the boarding house, old Samuel Beck, who'd been in the valley longer than anyone. But not everyone was welcoming. A cluster of women near the church steps made no effort to lower their voices as Evangeline passed. "Mail-order bride," one sniffed. "No better than she should be, if you ask me." And from Philadelphia, another added, "Probably never seen a cow before she got here." "Give her 6 months," a third predicted. "She'll be on the train back east before winter sets in proper." Evangeline's cheeks burned, but she kept walking. Then, unexpectedly, she stopped, turned. The women fell silent, suddenly aware they'd been overheard. "You're right," Evangeline said, her voice clear and steady. "I hadn't seen a cow up close before coming here, but hands learn, and I am learning." The women exchanged glances, uncertain how to respond to such directness. Before they could gather themselves, a familiar voice cut through the awkward silence. "Well said, Miss Dillard." Marshal Pike stepped from behind the group, his badge glinting in the sun. He moved with the easy confidence of a man used to others stepping aside. Takes courage to admit ignorance, though one wonders what else you might be learning, or hiding. "Marshal," Silas said, appearing at Evangeline's elbow. His tone was neutral, but she felt the tension in his body. "McGrath." Pike tipped his hat mockingly. "Just making conversation with your intended. A lawman likes to know all the citizens in his jurisdiction. Makes it easier to protect them from undesirable elements." "We're peaceable folks," Silas replied. No need for protection. Pike's smile was cold. Everyone needs protection sometimes, even from themselves, even from those they trust. His eyes lingered on Evangeline. You'd be surprised what people conceal, the lies they tell. Why, just last month, we had a woman come through claiming to be someone she wasn't. Caused quite a scandal when the truth came out. Evangeline's heart hammered, but she forced herself to meet his gaze steadily. How fortunate that you discovered the deception. Indeed, I have a talent for seeing through false faces. He touched his hat brim again. Enjoy your Sunday. Folks, I'll be watching. As Pike sauntered away, Evangeline felt her knees threaten to buckle. Silas's hand on her elbow steadied her. Don't let him rattle you, he said quietly. He's fishing, nothing more. They made their way back to the wagon in silence. But as Silas helped her up, she caught his expression thoughtful, almost puzzled, as if he were working through a problem in his mind. The ride home was quiet, but it was a different quality of silence than after their first town visit. This felt contemplative rather than tense. When they reached the ranch, Silas surprised her by speaking. You handled yourself well today, both with those gossips and with Pike. I shouldn't have spoken to those women? Evangeline said it wasn't proper. Proper, Silas gave a short laugh. Out here, proper is what keeps you alive and sane. Standing up for yourself that matters more than what some biddies think is ladylike. As he unhitched the horses, Evangeline watched him work, noting the efficient movements, the gentle way he handled the animals despite his strength. This man had chosen her, or rather, had chosen Martha. The weight of that deception pressed against her ribs. That evening, after supper, Silas surprised her again. Instead of reading his Bible in the rocking chair, he stood awkwardly by the table. Thought you might like these, he said, producing a small bouquet of wildflowers, Indian paintbrush, and prairie roses, their colors vivid against his work-worn hands. Saw them by the creek this morning. Evangeline stared at the flowers, her throat tight. No one had ever brought her flowers, not once in her 22 years of life. She took them with trembling fingers, finding a jar to use as a vase. They're beautiful, she whispered. Thank you. He nodded, color rising in his cheeks, and retreated to his usual chair, but the flowers remained between them, bright spots of color in the lamplight, speaking words neither of them could say. That night, Evangeline lay awake thinking of Pike's knowing looks, of the women's cruel words, of Silas defending her without question. She thought of his rare laugh, the careful way he'd presented the flowers, how he'd stood by her at church as if she truly belonged at his side. The weight of her lies grew heavier each day, not because she feared discovery, though Pike's threats chilled her, but because Silas McGrath was proving to be a man worth telling the truth to, a man who deserved honesty. But how could she confess now? How could she destroy this fragile thing building between them, this possibility of home? In the darkness, she pressed her face into the pillow and tried not to think of what would happen when the truth finally came to light. Because it would, Pike would make sure of that. And when it did, the wildflowers would wilt. The defense would turn to anger, and whatever she was beginning to feel for this quiet, steady man would crumble like drought-struck earth. Outside, a screech owl called, its cry lonesome in the vast night. Evangeline closed her eyes and prayed not for the lie to hold, but for the courage Ruth had shown in that ancient story, the courage to cling to what mattered, even in a strange land, even when everything familiar was stripped away, even when the very name you carried was not your own. The letter arrived on a Tuesday afternoon, carried by a passing freight driver who'd picked it up at the post office. Evangeline's hands trembled as she recognized Martha's handwriting on the envelope, addressed to E. Crow, care of S. McGrath, Double M Ranch. She waited until Silas had ridden out to check the water holes before breaking the seal with shaking fingers. Dearest Evangeline. The letter began in Martha's precise script. I trust this finds you well settled in your new life. Chicago has proven everything I hoped and more. Mr. Whitmore is generous and refined, nothing like the rough men of the frontier. I sometimes wonder how you fare with your cowboy. Does he suspect he'll know sooner or later? You realize, secrets don't stay buried in small places. When he learns the truth, and he will, what then? Perhaps you should confess before someone else forces your hand. Then again, you always were too tender-hearted for your own good. Your devoted friend, M. The paper crackled as Evangeline's grip tightened. Martha's words slithered through her mind like poison. He'll know sooner or later. The threat was veiled but clear if Evangeline didn't serve Martha's purposes. The truth might find its way to Cedar Ridge. She burned the letter in the stove, watching Martha's elegant handwriting curl and blacken. But the damage was done. Every moment of peace she'd found in the past weeks crumbled like ash. That evening, as storm clouds gathered on the horizon, Evangeline moved through supper preparations like a sleepwalker. Her hands shaped the biscuit dough, but her mind churned with possibilities. Should she confess now? Throw herself on Silas's mercy, pack her few things and disappear into the night? The thought of leaving sent a physical pain through her chest. Thunder rumbled in the distance as Silas came in from the barn, shaking dust from his hat. "Storm coming," he said. "Might be a big one. The animals are restless." She nodded, not trusting her voice. As she set his plate before him, their fingers accidentally touched. The brief contact sent warmth through her, followed immediately by crushing guilt. "You're quiet tonight," he observed, studying her face. "Something troubling you?" "No," she lied, the word bitter on her tongue. "Just tired." He didn't press, but his gray eyes remained thoughtful as they ate. The first fat raindrops began hitting the tin roof, a scattered percussion that quickly became a roar. Lightning illuminated the windows in stark flashes. "Good," Silas said, pushing back his plate. "We need the rain. Been too dry." He paused, then added softly, "This was good. Martha, the biscuits especially." The false name was like a slap. Evangeline's hands clenched in her lap. "Thank you," she whispered. A sudden pounding at the door made them both start. Silas frowned. Visitors were rare at the ranch, especially after dark. He opened the door to reveal a figure in a dripping slicker, barely visible through the driving rain. "Well, well," a familiar voice said. "Isn't this cozy?" Martha Dillard pushed back her hood, water streaming from her traveling cloak. Her eyes glittered with malicious amusement as she took in the domestic scene, Silas in his shirt sleeves, Evangeline frozen at the table. "Martha," Silas said, confusion clear in his voice. "But you're already here?" Martha laughed, the sound sharp as breaking glass. "Oh, Mr. McGrath, you poor trusting fool. You've been harboring an impostor." She pointed at Evangeline with theatrical flourish. "That's not Martha Dillard. That's Evangeline Crow, my former housemaid. I'm Martha Dillard." The words hung in the air like lightning about to strike. Evangeline couldn't breathe, couldn't move. She watched Silas's face change as understanding dawned confusion giving way to shock. Then something worse, betrayal. "She fooled you," Martha continued, clearly enjoying herself. "Took my ticket. My name, my life. I've come to set things right, to claim what's mine." "No," Evangeline finally found her voice, standing on unsteady legs. "It wasn't like that. You gave me the ticket. You told me to come here, to be you." "Lies," Martha cut her off smoothly. "The desperate tales of a desperate woman. Really, Mr. McGrath, did you never wonder, look at her hands soft as butter. She'd never done a day's work before coming here, hardly mail-order bride material." Silas hadn't moved, hadn't spoken since Martha's revelation. He stood statue still, rain from the open door spattering his boots, his gray eyes fixed on Evangeline, and what she saw there made her heart shatter. "Tell me," he said, his voice terrifyingly quiet, "is it true?" Evangeline's throat closed. She wanted to explain, to make him understand the desperation that had driven her, the growing feelings that made the lie agony. But all that came out was a broken whisper, "Yes, it's true." The silence stretched, broken only by the storm's fury and Martha's satisfied breathing. Then Silas turned and walked out into the rain without a word, disappearing into the darkness. "No," Evangeline started after him, but Martha caught her arm. "Let him go. He'll come to his senses and realize I'm the better choice. I'm the real Martha Dillard, after all, the one he's sent for." Evangeline wrenched free, grabbed a shawl, and plunged into the storm. Rain lashed her face, turned the yard to mud that sucked at her boots. Lightning split the sky, illuminating the ranch in snapshot moments, the barn, the corral, the endless prairie beyond. "Silas," she called, but the wind tore her voice away. She stumbled through the mud, searching desperately. He couldn't have gone far, not in this weather. She found him by the corral, standing motionless in the downpour. His shirt was plastered to his body, his head bowed. As she approached, he spoke without turning. "Why?" The single word carried more pain than anger. "I was desperate," Evangeline said, having to shout over the storm. "My mother died. I had nothing, no one. Martha offered me her ticket, her chance. I thought I could be her, just until—" "Until what?" He turned then, rain streaming down his face. "Until you felt guilty enough, until someone forced the truth. Until I could tell you myself," she cried. "I wanted to tell you so many times, but I was afraid you'd send me away. And then I started to care for you, for this place, and I couldn't bear." "Stop!" He held up a hand. "Just stop!" They stood facing each other in the storm, two figures caught between lightning flashes. Evangeline's heart broke with each breath, knowing she'd destroyed the very thing she'd come to treasure. "My name is Evangeline Crow," she said, lifting her chin despite her tears mixing with rain. "I'm 22 years old, from Boston. My father died when I was young, and my mother raised me with love and dignity despite our poverty. I can cook and clean and mend, and I'm learning to be useful here. I'm not Martha Dillard, but everything else, everything I've felt, that's been true." Silas stared at her for a long moment, then shook his head. I can't." He gestured helplessly. "You should go back to the house. You'll catch your death out here." "Silas." "Go." The word was hollow, defeated. "Please, just go." Evangeline turned and stumbled back through the rain, each step heavier than the last. She'd lost everything again, but this time, it wasn't poverty or circumstance that had taken it from her. This time, she'd destroyed it with her own hands, her own lies. Back at the house, Martha had made herself comfortable by the fire, looking pleased despite her wet clothes. "Well, has he come to his senses?" Evangeline didn't answer. She stood dripping in the doorway, watching the storm rage outside, wondering if Silas would return at all, wondering what would happen when morning came and the storm passed, leaving only the wreckage of trust in its wake. The thunder rolled on, echoing the storm in her heart. She'd been Evangeline Crow pretending to be Martha Dillard for so long. She'd almost forgotten who she really was. Now, stripped of her disguise, she was nobody at all, just a lost woman in a stranger's house, waiting for judgment to fall. Lightning illuminated Silas's form as he pushed through the storm, following the muddy tracks that led away from the ranch house. His boots slipped in the wet earth, rain driving into his face like needles, but he pressed on. She couldn't have gone far in this weather. The fool woman would catch her death in the darkness and cold. He found her collapsed beside a large boulder a quarter-mile from the house. Her blue dress, the one they'd bought together in town, now sodden and mud-stained. She was curled in on herself, shoulders shaking with sobs that the storm nearly drowned out. "Evangeline," he said, the name strange on his tongue. She looked up, her face a pale oval in the darkness, streaked with rain and tears. "Leave me be," she choked out. "I'll be gone by morning. I won't trouble you anymore." Instead of answering, Silas shrugged off his coat, wet as it was, and wrapped it around her shoulders. When she tried to protest, he simply lifted her into his arms, ignoring her feeble struggles. "Hush," he said gruffly. "Whatever else you are, you're not dying of pneumonia on my land." She went limp against his chest, and he carried her back through the storm, his boots finding purchase despite the mud. Behind them, lightning crashed, illuminating the prairie in stark, violent beauty. The house appeared through the rain, lamplight glowing warm in the windows. Martha stood on the porch, her expression shifting from smugness to outrage as she saw them approach. "Silas McGrath, what do you think you're doing? That woman is a liar and a thief." Silas paused at the steps, Evangeline still in his arms. He looked at Martha, really looked at her for the first time, saw the calculating coldness in her eyes, the cruel twist of her mouth. This was the woman he'd corresponded with, the one whose letters had seemed so proper and suitable. Now, seeing her beside Evangeline, he wondered how he'd ever thought those letters held any warmth. "Get out of my way," he said quietly. "I beg your pardon." Martha's voice rose. "I'm Martha Dillard. I'm the one you sent for." "Maybe so," Silas said, climbing the steps. "But you're not the one I want." He shouldered past her into the house, carrying Evangeline to the bedroom. She was shivering violently now, her lips tinged blue. He set her on the bed, then turned to Martha, who had followed them inside. "There's a barn out back," he told her. "You can shelter there for the night. In the morning, I'll take you to town." Martha's face flushed red. "You're choosing her, that lying little nobody, over me." "I'm choosing the woman who's worked beside me these past weeks," Silas said evenly. "The one who burned her hands learning to manage my stove, who stood up to the gossips in town, who made this empty house feel like a home. I don't give a damn what name she carried when she got here." "This is a mistake," Martha hissed. "When people learn the truth, then they'll learn it." He moved to the door, holding it open. "The barn's that way." Martha's face contorted with fury, but something in Silas's expression must have warned her not to push further. She grabbed her wet cloak and stormed out into the rain, throwing curses over her shoulder that the wind tore away. Silas closed the door and turned back to Evangeline, who sat shivering on the bed, his coat still draped over her shoulders. Her green eyes were enormous in her pale face. "You should have told me," he said quietly. "I know." Her voice was barely a whisper. "I'm sorry. I'm so sorry." He moved to the fireplace, building up the flames until warmth began to fill the room. Then he pulled the rocking chair closer to the bed and sat down, his elbows on his knees. "Tell me now," he said. "All of it. The truth this time." So she did, in a voice hoarse from crying. She told him about her mother's death, the debts, the eviction notice, about Martha's offer and her own desperation, about the fear that had kept her silent, and the growing feelings that had made the lie torture. "I never meant to hurt you," she finished, her eyes fixed on her clasped hands. I wanted to belong somewhere, to matter to someone. And then I met you, and you were so kind, so patient, and She trailed off, unable to continue. Silas was quiet for a long moment, processing everything he'd heard. The rain had softened to a steady patter on the roof, and, somewhere in the distance, a coyote howled. "My mother used to say," he began slowly, "that people show you who they are not in their words, but in their actions, in the work of their hands and the choices they make when things get hard." He looked up at her then, his gray eyes serious. "You lied to me, that's true, but you also worked until your hands bled to make this place better. You stood by me in town when those women mocked you. You brought warmth to this house for the first time since I built it." "But I'm not Martha," Evangeline whispered. "I'm not who you wanted." "Martha Dillard wrote pretty letters," Silas said. But the woman who just stormed off to my barn, that's not someone I'd want to wake up beside for the next 40 years. He leaned back in the chair, studying her. You say your name is Evangeline? She nodded, tears slipping down her cheeks. Evangeline, he repeated, testing the sound. It suits you better than Martha ever did. He stood, moving to sit beside her on the bed, not touching, but close enough that she could feel his warmth. I'm not saying I'm not hurt. I am. Trust, once broken, takes time to mend, but I think it can mend, if both people are willing to work at it. You're not sending me away. The hope in her voice nearly broke his resolve to keep his distance. Where would you go? He asked practically. Back to Boston with nothing to Martha's mercy. He shook his head. No, you'll stay. We'll figure out the rest as we go. But what will people say when they find out? Let them talk. His jaw set stubbornly. This is my land, my house, my choice, and I choose you, Evangeline Crow, not because of a lie or a letter, but because of what I've seen these past weeks, because of who you've shown yourself to be when you thought no one was watching. She turned to face him then, her eyes searching his face. None of us deserve grace, he interrupted gently. But sometimes we get it anyway. The storm was passing, the thunder growing distant. In the lamplight, they sat together on the narrow bed, two people stripped of pretense, facing an uncertain future, but for the first time since Martha's arrival. Evangeline felt something ease in her chest. Not quite hope yet, but the possibility of it. You should rest, Silas said finally, standing. Dry clothes are in the trunk. I'll be in the main room if you need anything. As he reached the door, she found her voice. Silas, thank you for coming after me. For choosing me. He paused, not turning around. Get some sleep. Evangeline, tomorrow we start over, this time with the truth between us. The door closed softly behind him, leaving her alone with the dying fire and the fading storm. She changed into dry clothes with trembling fingers, her mind struggling to grasp what had just happened. She'd confessed everything, been exposed as a fraud, and yet he'd chosen her. Not Martha with her cold beauty and proper credentials, but Evangeline Crow, nobody from Boston. As she lay down on the bed where she'd slept so many nights as an imposter, she felt something fundamental shift. Tomorrow would bring challenges Martha to deal with, townspeople to face, trust to rebuild. But tonight, for the first time in months, she would sleep without the weight of lies crushing her chest. Outside, the rain gentled to a whisper, and somewhere in the house, she could hear Silas moving about, tending the fire, the familiar sounds of his presence. She wasn't Martha Dillard anymore. She was Evangeline Crow, and somehow, impossibly, that was enough. The morning after the storm dawned clear and bright, with that peculiar freshness that follows violent weather. Evangeline woke to the sound of voices in the yard, many voices, raised in anger and excitement. She dressed quickly, her fingers fumbling with the buttons, and peered through the window. A crowd had gathered before the house. She recognized several faces from town, the gossiping women from church, Marshall Pike with his chest puffed out importantly, and others she'd seen but never met. At the center of it all stood Martha, still in her mud-stained traveling dress, gesturing dramatically as she held court. You're living in sin with an imposter. Martha's voice carried clearly. I demand justice. This woman stole my life, my future. Evangeline's heart sank. Of course, Martha wouldn't leave quietly. She'd gathered an audience for her final performance, ensuring maximum humiliation. The bedroom door opened, and Silas entered. He was fully dressed, his face calm but determined. They've been gathering since dawn, he said quietly. Pike brought half the town with him. I'm sorry, Evangeline whispered. I've brought such trouble to you. You've brought nothing I can't handle. He studied her face. Are you ready for this? She wanted to say no, wanted to hide beneath the bed like a child, but something in his steady gaze gave her strength. She lifted her chin. I'm ready. They walked out together, Silas slightly ahead, shielding her with his body. The crowd fell silent as they emerged onto the porch. Evangeline felt the weight of dozens of eyes, curious, scandalized, judgmental. There she is, Martha pointed accusingly. The thief, the liar. That's enough. Silas's voice cut through the morning air like a whip crack. You've had your say. Miss Dillard, time you were on your way. On my way, Martha laughed shrilly. I'm not going anywhere until this creature is removed from the premises rightfully belonging to me. Nothing here belongs to you, Silas said evenly. Never did. Pike stepped forward, hand resting on his pistol in a way meant to be threatening. Now, McGrath, the lady has a point. If this woman obtained her position through fraud— If you wish me gone, Evangeline interrupted, stepping out from behind Silas, I will go. The crowd stirred, murmuring among themselves. She stood on the porch, barefoot on the wet wood, feeling smaller than she ever had but refusing to shrink. These people had come for a spectacle, to see her humiliated and driven out, but she wouldn't give them the satisfaction of seeing her break. I deceived Mr. McGrath, she continued, her voice carrying clearly. That's true. I took another woman's name out of desperation, out of fear, but I never came to steal. I came because I was desperate for a place, for a chance to belong. Desperate enough to lie. One of the church women called out, desperate enough to trick a good man. Yes, Evangeline admitted simply, desperate enough for that. My mother had just died. I had nothing, no family, no home, no hope. When the chance came— She spread her hands. I took it, and I have regretted the deception every day since. Pretty words. Pike sneered. But the law? The law, Silas interrupted, moving to stand beside Evangeline, says a man can choose his own wife, and I choose her. The crowd fell silent, shocked. Martha's face contorted with rage. You can't be serious. She's a nobody, a fraud. She's the woman who's stood beside me these past weeks, Silas said, his voice ringing with conviction. Who's worked until her hands bled to make a home here? Who's faced your contempt and gossip with dignity? He looked directly at Martha. You wrote pretty letters, Miss Dillard, but letters don't make a wife. Work does, loyalty does, heart does. This is ridiculous. Martha stamped her foot like a child. Marshall, surely you can't allow— I don't see any crime here, Pike said slowly, clearly disappointed. Man wants to marry a woman. That's his business, even if she did sail under false colors for a time. But, Miss Dillard— Silas cut her off. I'll say this once more. There's nothing for you here. I'll pay for your passage back east, or wherever you want to go, but you're not welcome on my land. For a moment, Martha stood frozen, her beautiful face ugly with fury. Then she whirled to face the crowd. You're all witnesses to this travesty. When it ends badly, and it will remember that I warned you. She stalked off toward town, her ruined dress dragging in the mud. Several of the townspeople began to drift away, the show not providing the scandal they'd hoped for. But others lingered, looking at Evangeline with new eyes. Rosa pushed through the remaining crowd, Miguel close behind her. Miss Evangeline, she called out, deliberately using her real name. I brought the washing soap you asked about, the kind that works in our water. It was a small gesture, but a public one. Rosa climbed the porch steps and embraced Evangeline briefly. You are who you are, she whispered, and that is enough. Old Samuel Beck cleared his throat. Seems to me, he said loudly, a person ought to be judged by their actions, not their name. This young woman's been nothing but respectful since she arrived. That counts for something in my book. One by one, Others began to speak up. Not everyone, some still looked scandalized, and a few muttered darkly as they left. But enough. The widow Jensen nodded approvingly. Takes courage to own up to a mistake publicly. More courage than most have. Even Reverend Morse, who had arrived with the crowd, stepped forward. Perhaps, he said gently. This is a reminder that all of us have need of forgiveness at times, and that love can grow in unexpected soil. As the crowd finally dispersed, Evangeline found herself trembling. Silas's hand found hers, warm and steady. It's done, he said quietly. No more secrets, no more lies. They'll talk, she said. For years, probably. Every time we go to town. Let them! He turned her to face him, his gray eyes serious. I meant what I said. Evangeline, you've proven yourself in ways that matter. The rest is just noise. She thought of Martha's threats, of the gossip that would follow them, of all the challenges still to come. But standing there in the morning sun, her hand in his, she felt something she hadn't experienced in so long she'd almost forgotten its name, peace. I still don't have anything, she said softly. No dowry, no family connections, nothing to bring to a marriage except myself. That's enough, Silas said simply. More than enough. Behind them, Rosa and Miguel were helping to restore order to the yard, churned to mud by so many feet. The ranch hands who'd watched from a distance went back to their work. Life on the Double M continued, as it always had, governed by the rhythms of seasons and stock rather than human drama. There's something else, Silas said, reaching into his pocket. He pulled out a simple silver ring, worn smooth with age. This was my mother's. I've been carrying it since I decided to send for a bride. Seems to me it belongs on your hand, if you'll have it, if you'll have me. Evangeline looked at the ring, then at the man offering it. Not romantic by Eastern standards, perhaps, no bended knee or flowery speeches, but real, honest, true. Yes, she whispered, then louder. Yes, I'll have you, Silas McGrath, if you're certain. Woman, he said with the ghost of a smile. I just faced down half the town for you. I think that counts as certain. He slipped the ring onto her finger, where it fit as if made for her. In the distance, she could see the last of the townspeople heading back to Cedar Ridge, probably already spinning the morning's events into fodder for weeks of gossip. Martha was gone, her threats as empty as her promises had been. Come on, Silas said, tugging her toward the door. Breakfast is long overdue, and we've got a ranch to run. The cattle don't care about our drama. As she followed him inside, Evangeline marveled at the strange turns life could take. She'd left Boston as Evangeline Crow, arrived as Martha Dillard, and now she would become Evangeline McGrath. The journey had been built on deception, but perhaps that made the final truth even sweeter. Through the window, she could see storm clouds building again on the horizon. There would be other challenges, other storms to weather, but they would face them together. Honestly this time, with no shadows between them. The ring caught the morning light as she moved about the kitchen, preparing breakfast for the man who had chosen her not for her name or connections, but for herself alone. And that, she thought as she worked, was the greatest gift anyone had ever given her, the freedom to be exactly who she was. The morning after the confrontation broke clear and crystalline, with dew sparkling on the prairie grass like scattered diamonds. Evangeline stood at the kitchen window, watching the sunrise paint the landscape in shades of gold and amber. Her hands, now roughened by weeks of ranch work, wrapped around a cup of coffee as she contemplated the view that had become home. You're up early, Silas said from the doorway. She turned to find him already dressed for the day's work, his hat in hand. Couldn't sleep, she admitted. Too much happiness. I think I keep expecting to wake and find it all a dream. He crossed to her, setting his hat on the table. No dream, he said simply, just life, moving forward as it does. They worked side by side that day, mending the fence line that the storm had damaged. Evangeline's movements were sure now, her hands confident with hammer and wire. She caught Silas watching her with something like pride, and the warmth of it carried her through the afternoon heat. Miguel rode up near sunset, tipping his hat. "Boss, Senora, thought you should know that woman. Miss Dillard. She took the morning stage to Denver, made quite a fuss at the depot, but she's gone." "Good," Silas said shortly. "Any other news from town?" Miguel grinned. "Say, seems folks are divided. Half think you're crazy, half think you're the smartest man in the valley. Rosa says to tell Senora Evangeline that the church ladies are planning a wedding quilt." After Miguel left, Evangeline looked at Silas in wonder. "A wedding quilt? But they were so—" "People can surprise you," he said. "Give them something real to respect, and most will come around. The others don't matter." The days that followed fell into a rhythm both new and familiar. They worked together with an ease born of understanding, Silas no longer needing to explain, Evangeline no longer pretending knowledge she didn't have. In the evenings, they sat together on the porch, watching the vast sky fade from blue to purple to star-studded black. "I've been thinking," Silas said one such evening, "about the wedding. Reverend Morse would marry us proper, whenever you're ready." Evangeline considered this, her mother's ring catching the lamplight. "I'd like that," she said, "but simple. Just us and those who wish us well." "Agreed." He paused, then added quietly, "I want you to write to anyone back east, anyone who should know you're well and settled. I'll pay the postage." Her throat tightened. "There's no one. Mother was all I had." "Then we'll make our own family," he said matter-of-factly. "Starting with us." The wedding took place 2 weeks later, on a crisp morning with the mountains sharp against the horizon. Evangeline wore her blue dress cleaned and pressed with wildflowers in her hair. Rosa stood as her witness, beaming, while Miguel stood for Silas. The church was half full, with those who had chosen acceptance over scandal. Reverend Morse spoke of Ruth and Boaz, of finding love in unexpected places, of the courage to choose a new life. When Silas slipped his mother's wedding band onto her finger, Evangeline felt the last of her old life fall away. She was no longer Evangeline Crow, desperate and alone. She was Evangeline McGrath, with a place and a purpose and a partner. The reception was held at the ranch, a simple affair with cake Rosa had baked and fiddle music from one of the hands. Even some who had condemned her initially came to offer tentative congratulations. The widow Jensen pressed a packet of seeds into her hands. "For your garden," she said gruffly. "Flowers from my grandmother's stock. They'll grow well here if you tend them right." As the sun set, painting the sky in brilliant oranges and reds, the guests departed, leaving Silas and Evangeline alone at last. They stood on the porch, her hand in his, watching the stars emerge one by one. "No more sleeping in the barn," she said softly. "No more sleeping in the barn." He agreed, a smile in his voice. Inside, the house waited no longer empty but full of promise. Their life together would not be easy. The land remained harsh, demanding constant work and vigilance. Drought would come, and storms, and times when the cattle prices fell and money grew scarce. There would still be those in town who whispered about the mail-order bride who wasn't, the scandal of their beginning. But they would face it together, honestly now, with no lies between them. In the months and years that followed, they would build more than just a successful ranch. They would build a partnership based on trust earned through trial, respect forged in shared labor, and love that had grown not from pretty letters but from daily choice. Sometimes, on quiet evenings, Evangeline would remember that desperate girl on the train platform, taking another woman's name in exchange for a chance at life. She would think of Martha, whose coldness had inadvertently brought her to this place. Most of all, she would think of Silas, who had seen through the deception to the truth beneath, who had chosen her not for her name but for her heart. The West was indeed a hard land, unforgiving of weakness or pretense, but it was also a place of second chances, where people could remake themselves through work and will. Evangeline had come seeking survival and found so much more: a home, a purpose, a love as enduring as the mountains on the horizon. As she prepared for bed on her wedding night, she paused to look out the window one last time. The prairie stretched endlessly under the stars, wild and beautiful, and theirs. Tomorrow would bring its own challenges. But tonight, she was exactly where she belonged. She thought of her mother's words: "Choose life, Evangeline, always choose life." She had chosen, even when it meant deception. And, in the end, that desperate choice had led her to truth more profound than she could have imagined. Silas appeared beside her, solid and real, and hers. "What are you thinking?" "That I'm glad," she said simply. "Glad for the journey that brought me here, difficult as it was. Glad for the courage to take another's name, and even more glad for the courage to reclaim my own." He wrapped his arms around her, and together they looked out at the land that would shape their days and test their resolve. It was a hard land indeed, but they would meet its challenges as they had met each other, with honesty, determination, and hearts willing to see beyond the surface to the truth beneath. From a beginning in deception had grown something true and lasting, and in the vast wilderness of the frontier, two souls had found in each other not just survival, but home. Thank you so much for listening to this story of love, deception, and redemption in the Wild West. I'd love to know where you're enjoying this tale, whether you're listening during your commute, relaxing at home, or perhaps even somewhere out on the prairie under the same vast skies that witnessed Evangeline and Silas's journey. Please subscribe to From Wild West channel and share your thoughts about their story in the comments below. Did you believe Silas would forgive Evangeline? What would you have done in her shoes? Let's discuss this tale of second chances and the courage to choose love over fear.